fees for professional or technical services. If there is any payment which is made for professional services or technical services, then the tax has to be withheld from such payments under section 194J. Now, there are various conditions under which tax has to be held under section 194J. But before we go to all that, let us first understand what is it that one should know in respect of section 194J. So the issues that come up is who are liable to deduct tax under section 194J. Is it a resident? Is it non-resident? Is it both? Is it individuals? Which category of taxpayers are required to deduct tax under section 194J? Who should be the payee? If these people are making the payment, again, the recipient can be a resident or a non-resident. Who should it be when section 194J will be attracted? That's the first issue. Second, whether payment qualifies as fee for professional services or technical services. So what is the nature of services which are covered under professional or technical? Not every payment is covered under professional or technical services. If these are payments for contract, right, for works contract, let's say for example, or for interest or for some other services, they may not be qualifying under 194J. So what is the meaning of professional services or technical services? Minimum threshold for deduction of taxes. Now, if the payment which is made by one person, let's say A to B, is only 1,000 rupees for professional services, it will be very, very inconvenient for A to deduct taxes from such payment because that will be a very small amount. So therefore, there is a minimum threshold below which, if the payments are made which are in the nature of professional services or technical services, no tax is required to be deducted. Timing of deduction. Again, like we discussed in some of the earlier sections, there could be a credit of invoice in respect of professional services. There could be an advance payment. What is the time when the tax has to be deducted? Is it at the time of credit or payment or whichever is earlier? Are there any exceptions to section 194J when this section will not apply? So let's look at all these one by one to understand the withholding tax under section 194J for payment in the nature of professional services or technical services. Like I said earlier, generally there are two parties in a transaction: a payer or the person who is making the payment and the recipient. As we discussed earlier, the first thing we need to know is who all are liable to deduct TDS under section 194J. Now, a payer may fall in three categories insofar as section 194J is concerned. The payer could be a resident, but a person who is other than an individual or HCF. The payer could be a resident, but who is an individual or HCF, or the payer could even be a non-resident. That's the third category. If the payer is a person who is a resident, other than an individual and an HCF, which means, suppose if a limited liability partnership is making payment, or if a company is making payment, or a partnership firm is making payment, anyone who is other than an individual or HCF, they are covered under section 194J, which means that these people, if they make payment in respect of professional or technical services to another recipient, they are under an obligation to withhold tax. Now the question is, even if the withholding has to be done, other conditions, will they apply? Yes, generally they are assumed to be liable to deduct tax, but if they fall under any of the exceptions, so let's say if the payment made is below the threshold, then even these people are not required to deduct TDS. But yes, as an entity, if a resident who is other than an individual or HUF makes payment in respect of professional or technical services, they are covered under Section 194J. A resident who is an individual or HUF may or may not be covered. They are only covered under certain particular situations. Which situations are these? I will just discuss that in a short while. A non-resident payer, of course, is covered under Section 194J. Now, we know who has to be the payer. Now, who has to be the recipient? In case of recipient, it's an easy task. A recipient could be a resident. If he is a resident, he's covered under Section 194J. What this means is that if any of the payer who is liable to deduct TDS makes a payment to any resident in respect of professional or technical services, then this recipient who is a resident is covered under Section 194J, and therefore the payer has to withhold tax. But if the recipient is a non-resident, then 194J is not applicable. Right? 194J is not applicable. It is 195, Section 195, which requires withholding tax on payments which may be in the nature of professional or technical services where the recipient is a non-resident. Now, when are individuals and HUF covered? In other words, when are they liable to deduct TDS? If the payer is an individual or HUF, if the answer is yes, then the first question we need to ask is the individual or the HUF liable to tax audit under Section 44AB during the preceding financial year? So if I have to withhold tax during financial year 2018-19, I will check whether during financial year 2017 and 18, this individual or HUF who is making the payment, were they liable to tax audit under Section 44AB? 44AB prescribes conditions under which a person may be liable to tax audit. Now, if the answer is no, which means that the individual or HUF is not liable to tax audit, then they do not have a liability to deduct TDS under Section 194J. But if the individual or HUF was liable for tax audit during the preceding year, then the additional question we need to ask is, are the services exclusively for personal purposes of individual or the member of the HUF? What this means is, suppose you go to any person who provides professional services. A goes to B. Right? Now, B provides some professional services to A, but A is using them for his personal purposes and not for business purposes. These are exclusively for personal purposes. In that case, if they are for personal purposes, then there is no liability on A to deduct TDS. But if they are not exclusively for personal purposes, then the liability to deduct TDS arises. So I'll just summarize this once again. If the payer is an individual or HUF, you need to check whether they were liable to tax audit during the preceding financial year. If they were not liable for tax audit, they don't need to deduct TDS. Even when they are liable to deduct the tax audit in the preceding year, we need to find out whether or not the services are exclusively for personal purposes of the member of the HUF or the individual. If they are exclusively for personal purposes, again there is no liability to deduct TDS. But if they are not exclusively for personal purposes, then the TDS has to be deducted. In other words, TDS has to be deducted when there is a requirement of tax audit in the last preceding year, plus it is not exclusively for personal purpose. Right? Now, generally you would get an invoice which may contain goods and services tax, GST. Earlier, it would have contained service tax. Because we are talking about fee for professional or technical services, generally these services were liable to service tax earlier and now to GST. The invoice that you may get could be in either of these two situations. The first situation is, suppose the fee for professional services is 1 lakh. The invoice clearly mentions that a GST of 18% has been applied on such invoice and the total amount is 1,18,000. Now the question which comes up is, on what amount should the TDS be deducted? Should it be on 1 lakh or should it be on 1,18,000? Another case could be where you just get an invoice which mentions fee for professional services and the total amount that is given is 1,18,000. In these two cases, where the amount is mentioned separately, there is a circular from CBDT, 1 of 2014, dated 13/1/2014. This was in respect of service tax, and now after GST it has been modified as circular number 23 of 2017, dated 19/7/2017, which mentions that if the amount is separately indicated, the TDS has to be only on fee for professional services. So let's say if the rate is 10%, on 1 lakh we will apply 10% and withhold a tax of 10,000. But if the GST is not mentioned separately, then the TDS has to be deducted on this gross amount at the rate of 10%, which will be 11,800. In other words, if this GST is mentioned separately, no TDS on this portion. But if you do not have any specific mention, the entire amount is assumed to be towards professional services. So what are the payments which are covered under section 194J? 194J covers payments which are in the nature of fees for professional services. What all is covered as professional services? We have a summary slide after this. It could be fee for technical services as defined in explanation 2 to section 917. It could be in the nature of a remuneration or a fee or a commission, whatever might be the name, which is paid to a director, but not in the nature of salary. So if the director is an employee and he draws salary from the company, that would be liable for TDS reduction under section 192. But any other payment in the form of a remuneration or a fee or a commission, which is not salary, will be liable for tax reduction at the rate of 10% under section 194J. Royalty, as per explanation 2 to section 916, is also covered under section 194J. And then non-compete payment. Now, non-compete payment, basically, what exactly is that? Suppose A and B are two persons. A was carrying on some business. He sells the business to B, and B, when buying the business, tells A that for a given period you cannot again do the same business, which is called non-compete. You cannot compete against B in the same business. Such a payment, which is referred to in section 28, subsection 5A, are covered as 194J liable payments. Right? These could be payment for not carrying out any activity in relation to a business, or not sharing any copyright, trademark, patents, etc. Right? Now, what all can be covered as professional services? Professional services means services rendered by a person in the course of carrying on a legal profession, someone like a lawyer, medical profession, someone like a doctor who's running his own practice maybe, engineering, architectural profession, profession of accountancy. So as chartered accountants, if you are carrying the profession of accountancy and you charge some service fee from your client, that can be covered. Technical consultancy, interior decoration, it's very famous these days, advertising, or film artist, person who's an actor, cameraman, director, music director, art director, singer, lyricist, editor, all these film artists are covered. Profession of company secretary or spokesperson umpires, referee, coaches, trainers, team physician, physiotherapist, commentator, anchor, sport columnist, event manager. All of them are covered under professional services for the purpose of this section. Now, there is an exemption from deduction under section 194J. I spoke to you in the beginning of section 194J as there are certain thresholds, and if the payment is below these thresholds, then no requirement is there to deduct TDS under section 194J. No deduction under section 194J will be made if the aggregate of the amount, aggregate means the total of the amount of such sum credited or paid or likely to be credited or paid during the financial year does not exceed Rs 30,000 in case of. So if during the year there are 3 payments you are making, right, and the aggregate of the amounts paid, right, does not exceed 30,000 for fee for professional services, fee for technical services, royalty, non-compete payment. However, exemption limit of 30,000 is not applicable in case of remuneration or fee or commission paid to a director. That is, in such a case, TDS under section 194J needs to be deducted, even if the payments are less than 30,000. So any payment which is less than 30,000, so suppose you pay a remuneration or a commission to the director of, let's say, 25,000. While in all these cases, if that would have been the case, there was no requirement to deduct TDS. In case of commission to a director, TDS will need to be deducted. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, you can subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more such videos. You can like these videos and also share it with your friends. And if you're looking for material on this particular subject, you can visit us on our website at www.arinjayacademy.com.